The Five Movements, Video and Phases by Caden Keeler. The five movements that I will be performing today are shoulder elevation, shoulder flexion, supination at the radial and ulnar joint, hip flexion, and dorsiflexion at the talotibial joint. The first movement is shoulder elevation. Shoulder elevation's muscle involvement is the trapezius, the levator scapulae, and the rhomboid muscles. The agonist is the upper trapezius and the levator scapulae, and the antagonist is the lower trapezius and the serratus anterior. Again, shoulder elevation is just where you're bringing your shoulders up in a shrug. Next is shoulder flexion. Shoulder flexion's muscle involvement are the anterior deltoid, the pectoralis major, and the coracobrachialis. The agonist is the deltoid and the antagonist is the latissimus dorsi. Again, shoulder flexion is just where you're bringing your arms forward. Next is supination at the radial and ulnar joint. Supination at the radial and ulnar joints muscle involvement is the supinator and the biceps brachii. The agonist is the biceps brachii and the supinator, and the antagonist is the pronator teres and the pronator quadratus. Again, supination is just where you're bringing your palms up in this movement. Next is hip flexion. Hip flexion's muscle involvement is the iliacus and the psoas major. The agonist is the psoas major, and the antagonists are the hamstrings and the gluteus maximus. Again, hip flexion is just where you're bringing your hips forward, bringing your knees up. Next is dorsiflexion at the talotibial joint. Dorsiflexion at the talotibial joint's muscle involvement is the tibialis anterior, the extensor hallucis longus, and the extensor digitorum longus. The agonist is the tibialis anterior, and the antagonist is the gastrocnemius and soleus. So again, the dorsiflexion at the talotibial joint is just where you're bringing your toes up in that motion. The five movements I talked about today were shoulder elevation, shoulder flexion, supination at the radial and ulnar joint, hip flexion, and dorsiflexion at the talotibial joint.